that song takes me back 29 years. I requested that song at my mom's funeral. And I go right back there every time I hear that song. It was so gorgeous. So thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. As David said, my name is Jeannine Hedberg, and I'm a licensed Unity teacher in the Unity movement. And what that means is I lost count of how many classes. I really lost count. I took tons of classes over probably 6 years here at Unity of Naples from our other licensed Unity teacher, Nancy Jacklow. And then I went to Unity Village, and I took 3 semesters in Kansas City over 3 summers of additional classes. And then I had a week of exams. And I had to give a class to all the faculty. You can imagine. I'm giving a class to the faculty. I had to give a sermon. And I had to prove that I understood at least some of the basics of Unity principles. So in the Unity movement, a licensed Unity teacher can perform weddings, can perform funerals, can lead service, can teach classes. And so that's what I'm here to be at, to just help during this time of transition. And we are studying a lovely book, and I hope you enjoyed this introduction to it today. As David said, we're going to be looking at the 4 agreements over this week and the next 4 weeks. And it's a really, really fun book. And Don Miguel Ruiz wrote it. And what he's done is he's kind of made a world that parallels our world, I believe. And he starts out with a lovely story. It's a story of a young man who lives in a cave many, many years ago, and he never leaves the cave at night. Only during the day he'll go into town, but he's always home by nighttime. And he doesn't go outside of the cave. And one night, he decides to go out. And what does he see? 3.5 million stars all shining in the sky. And he says, wow. And at that moment, he has a moment of what we would call a realization of God. He knew that he was a part of a large energy. And he knew that the stars were part of that energy as well. And he knew that he was made of the same stuff the stars are made of. And then he saw the light between the stars, and he says, aha, light is a part of who I am. And he knew that the light and the matter came together as one force. And that one force we know as God, God the good. I call it beloved. Jesus called it Father, Abba. There is one force, and we are all part and parcel of that force. And this young man discovered this one night when he was out and went out of his cave. And the next day he went into town, and he saw people differently. He saw himself differently, but he saw everyone differently. He saw them as that aspect of God. But they didn't see him as an aspect of God. They saw him as the same old guy. And so he came to believe that we are all mirrors for people as they come into our life. But his mirror, he felt, was clear because he could see that, we call it the Christ, the perfection of God in each person he ran into, as well as each tree he saw, as well as each animal he saw. But people did not see him as having been changed. So Don Miguel Ruiz writes about a smoke that is over most people's mirrors. There's a level of smoke that prevents us from seeing that Christ presence, that perfection in each person. And so what he did was he decided that we are all part of that light, recognizing the light in others, that there is not a force, but there is an illusion. And that's what the smoke represents. It's an illusion that we are separate in this world. Because when he could see himself in everyone and everything, he knew that as the truth. And he tried to teach that to people and show people. And the 4 agreements is a path to come to that realization. Now, the first time I read the book, I took a class from one of our ministers. I think a bunch of people in the audience were in that class. And I'm reading the book, and I'm reading the book, and I'm reading the book, and we're going to class. And Don Miguel Ruiz calls what we do in the daily, in our daily being, as dreaming, because we dream something that is not God. God is pure love, pure life, perfection, joy, passion. But we dream something different. And Don Miguel Ruiz, again, in calling that the dream and calling that the agreements we make amongst each other, and that includes all the rules in the world, all the laws in the world, the religions in the world, our government, our schools, our cultures, our mom and dad. I think that was the first place I realized that I was learning how to behave in the world. And we have the power to give our attention to the things that matter in our life. And just speaking for myself, when I was young, my mom and dad would tell me how to behave and tell me how to answer questions, and I learned from them. And it may not have been, I may have had a desire in the back to be something different, to say something different. But when I did, I was chastised is a strong word, suggested that I behave in a different way. Suggested is a good way to put it. And so we learn from our parents, from our teachers when we're young. We learn from our co-workers in a job. We learn from our governments that give us laws that we didn't have any input into. But we learn how to behave. And what we find out as children is that we get the most attention when we can say, look at me, look at what I did. I really did that perfect. And when we don't do it perfect, it's like, oh, well, shucks, I guess maybe I'm not that good. And this type of behavior gets created, I will just speak for myself, but it gets created within us that we're not good enough if we don't behave absolutely as how our parents or the school or whatever group we're working with needs. And the way that this is communicated, according to Don Miguel Ruiz, is through language. But it's also body language, it's also looks, it's a lot of things, but we didn't get to choose our language necessarily. Our language was given to us by our parents, depending on where we lived. If we lived in France, I think we'd probably speak French. In Italy, Italian. Here we basically speak English. But we didn't have a choice in that, and we can learn other languages, but those are all agreements that have been made among a whole group of people on how we will relate to each other and how we will live. So again, language is tremendously important to keep society peaceful, to keep us growing together, to provide love. But the next thing we have is we have ideas. Well, gosh, I'd like to wear my blue dress today, but Mom put out the green dress. Well, Mom wants me to wear the green dress, so I guess that's okay. I've never liked green, but it's okay. So we then suppress some of our desires. And when we suppress our desires, we become a little bit, controlled is a strong word, but we become a little bit, we go along the guidelines that are set for us. And Don Miguel Ruiz in his book really talks about this, you're going to love this, as the domestication of humans. All right, so I'm reading the book the first time, and I come to this paragraph, and I'm like, oh, there is no way I am domesticated. There is no way that I'm on a leash. There is no way I'm a dog. I mean, please give me a break. I closed the book. I said, not going back to the class. That was the end of that. Now, so I get a call from the minister, and he says, well, why aren't you coming to class? And I said, well, I'm not domesticated. I am not domesticated. And he said, just read on in the book. And when I came back to the book and reread that, what I found was that, although it's a little bit of a strong word, it really was basically true. When I look at domestication as I was growing up, my folks were wonderful. I grew up in a little town in South Dakota. I would have had 20 people in my graduating class. I mean, it was a small place. But my mom's biggest thing was to say, now be a good girl. Be a good girl. Be a good girl and go out and do this. Be a good girl and do the dishes. Be a good girl and go talk to your grandfather. And what I learned then was that unless I was a good girl, as opposed to a bad girl, there was no in between. It was good girl or bad girl. Unless I was a good girl, I wouldn't get rewarded. I wouldn't get my parents' love. I wouldn't get any accolades. And I felt like I didn't have a place of safety if I was not a good girl. But unfortunately, what this leads to is that good girls always do what they're told. And good girls sometimes sit on their grandfather's laps inappropriately. And good girls are sometimes pushed around on the playground. And good girls are sometimes just sometimes not taken care of really well. And so what I learned was my mom didn't do it out of malice. This was how she was raised. But I realized that instead of saying, be a good girl, I believe what she meant was be a kind girl. And so in my mind, I've been able to change that in my life and say, I come with kindness. I come with kindness to people instead of being a good girl. And the words are often interchanged, but I really feel that being kind does not set me up for abuse, does not set me up for misuse, doesn't set people up. But this is from my experience. But these are all agreements that we make. So as David said in the reading, there are thousands of agreements we have that we've made both in our culture, but the worst thing I discovered was I became my own domesticator. I started making agreements for myself that I wasn't good enough, that I wasn't strong enough, that I wasn't brilliant enough, that I wasn't pretty enough. I made those agreements with myself. And then you can imagine what the next step is, because once I had those agreements with myself, then I had a judge inside of myself. And that judge says, you're right, Jeannine, you're not good enough. You're not strong enough. You're not pretty enough. You don't know enough to go out in the world. You don't know enough to help people. And over time, that led me, and it leads people to considering themselves a victim, to be put upon, that there's some force out there forcing me to be what I don't want to be. And again, in the 4 agreements, we're going to be presenting some tools for your tool belt. And that's all they are, is tools. Unity has no doctrine. We have a set of beliefs, we have a set of practices, a set of tools for your tool belt to help make your life a lot happier, a little bit different. So the judge judges all the time, and you just don't judge yourself wrong once. Does this ever happen to you? When I was 11, I got this really big candy cane from my uncle. It was like this big, just what a kid needs. Anyway, so my mom was making a peppermint candy pie, and she was crunching up the peppermint candy, and I was like, oh no, don't take my peppermint candy. And I yelled at her. I never yelled at my mom. And she got really angry at me. Didn't speak to me for days. And to this day, she didn't use my peppermint, by the way. She could use some other peppermint. But to this day, I don't eat peppermint. That brings back, just as the song brought back that memory, I can't eat peppermint because it brings back that memory that I hurt my mother. And those are those agreements that we have within ourselves. And they have power over us, and they take our power, our personal power away. And we do it thousands upon thousands upon thousands of times. If a criminal robs a store and goes to jail, they go to jail once. But this judge, jury, and executioner that then develops within me does that on a minute-by-minute basis. Never good enough, never strong enough, never pretty enough, a little chunky here and there, those kind of things. And it takes courage. As David said in the reading, it takes courage to be able to challenge these beliefs. Because then what happens is I have a personal dream. I live within a society. I have a societal dream. We have a dream in the United States. We have a dream in the world. And often, this dream can be looked at as violent, hurtful. The planet is heating up. We can look at this as terrible, horrific things that we have no power over, so we are obviously a victim. But the reality is that it takes such strength to change ourselves, because all knowledge is self-knowledge. All love ultimately is self-love. If we don't come from a place of being full inside, we know it is like a bank vault or a well that's full. When we're full of love, we can give love. But if we keep giving love that we don't have, we become worn out shells. And we need to have that flow of love coming into us. So it's critical that we start to change these agreements. And that's really what this book is about. It's taking the courage to be able to look at ourselves, look at me. I looked at myself and I said, okay, what am I going to change? I'm going to change this belief right now. I'm going to change this agreement. And what happens when I started to change an agreement that says I am enough, I am whole, I am perfect, when I started to believe that, instead of that I'm broken and only a partial person, all that power came back to me because I knew that agreement was no longer in my life. And so now I know I've got some of that power back. And every morning I say a prayer. It's a declaration prayer of declaring who I am. I am whole. I am perfect. I am strong. I am powerful. I am loving. I am harmonious. I am beautiful. I say that every morning. And that is what I am becoming, because I can embrace that truth and cut out the agreements. Stop the agreements that don't really support that. I'm no longer a victim in my life. I'm no longer broken. I'm no longer unlovable. I'm no longer unable to give love. Those are wonderful changes that have happened since I came to Unity 18 years ago and started to learn some of these techniques. The key to changing the world is not to go out and change the world. The first step is to change ourselves. We talk about becoming the change we want to see in the world, and that's where this idea comes from. That if we want to see more love in our world, we need to be more loving of ourselves. And self-love, from my standpoint, was one of the hardest things I could give myself. It's taken me a lot of years to get here, and I'm not there yet. But as we can set aside these agreements that don't help us and put other agreements in place that really define who we are as an aspect of God, as an aspect of all the goodness that's in the world, then we can start to change our life and step away from that judge, jury, and executioner inside of ourselves. And then we can change the world, and we can step out full of love, full of joy, full of passion, and impact the world. Because as each of us lets go of these agreements, we're able to step up in the world. We're able to bring the whole world with us. Because as we each grow, as we each walk up the steps of this wonderful growth we're experiencing, we take everyone with us. There is no one left behind. We take everyone in the entire world with us. And that's how we'll change the world. We'll get new agreements. We'll get our personal power back. And we will change from fear-based agreements to love-based agreements. That's what I've found in my life. That's what Don Miguel's book really talks about. And I believe if you'll come along for the next 4 weeks with us, you'll be able to see some of those very, very easy techniques. No, simple. They're very simple techniques. I won't say they're the easiest things in the world, but they're very simple techniques. But they're things that we go back to all the time, every day. And so I just invite you to come back for the next 4 weeks. I'm going to do a couple of the talks. We're going to have somebody else do some of them. And really just look at some additional tools for your tool belt. And I'd just like to ask the music team to come back up. David read a wonderful reading, and I'd just like to paraphrase it a little bit to end here, that you need a very strong will in order to adopt the 4 agreements. But if you can begin to live your life with these agreements, the transformation in your life will be amazing. You will see the drama of hell disappear right before your very eyes. Instead of living in a dream of hell, you will be creating a new dream, your personal dream of heaven. And I'm so blessed to have been with you this morning. Amy, Jesse. Thank you. Thank you.